stream in the couple of places that I promote it. So tell me a little bit about how the last couple of weeks have gone since we last talked.
So I haven't been playing a lot, and I think I also noticed one thing that's probably also one of the reasons why I stopped playing the game for a time.
Okay.
I'm tilting way too fast, so like
Oh.
I get really annoyed sometimes. I just know that I'm watching for like mistakes, and so I really notice it. Like before I was just like not really noticing, but now I'm really annoyed after this game because of how stupid my team is and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I really noticed that might. So I think that also might be a reason why I stopped playing the game for a time.
I see. Well, I think that should be our discussion for the day then. Let's talk a little
Yeah,
bit about
that's
tilt.
what I wanted to ask about anyway,
Perfect.
because that's gonna be real and is being an issue for sure.
Mm-hmm.
If I got to continue playing.
Okay. So, if that is before we get too deep into that, I do want to follow up on the stuff that we talked about last week.
Okay.
So, the very first time that we talked, we had been working on like deaths from proactive all-ins,
Yeah.
and then I think last time we talked about high mental APM and clean autos. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
So, how are those things going? I remember you saying last time that the deaths from proactive all-ins were like down, but still kind of a problem, like getting there, making
Yeah.
progress.
It's been a little bit better because I have been playing a lot. I could have been really improving it, but I know it's getting less and less over time.
Good, excellent. That's what we like to see. And have you been noticing yourself going into like high mental APM more often, or anything like that?
I'm better at dodging skill shots a bit, I noticed.
That's really good. That's one of the effects that we're hoping to see from that. So that's good. Great. Okay, so seems like both of those are kind of going okay. Keep working on them, and yeah. So let's talk about tilt. So there's a couple of things that I think we ought to kind of have just as like a baseline, and I think some of those we've already talked about. Right? Did we talked about the adult learning model before in one of our
Yeah.
sessions? Yeah. Okay. And did we talk about the inchworm model?
I don't think we did.
Okay, so the inchworm model is, I'll go ahead and screen share this idea that you can think about the way that your so first of all, the idea is just that like performance is going to vary over time, or not over time, but it's gonna vary on like a performance to performance basis, right? And this is unavoidable. It's just kind of what's going to happen, right? And so you can think of this as kind of like your like a graph of the quality of your decisions over some period of time, right? And
Okay.
you're going to have, on the one hand, you're going to have your best decisions that you make, when you're feeling really focused, you're kind of like in the zone, doing really well, right? And those are going to have generally good outcomes. You're going to have the decisions that you make when you're tired or when you're tilted, and those are going to be generally worse outcomes. And then you're going to have just a really nice large chunk of decisions that do okay.
Yeah.
They're kind of what's solid for you, right? And those are your B game, right? So, this is important to note because there's a couple of things that a lot of people will misunderstand about how they should expect their skill to progress, right? So, one mistake that people make a lot is they try to play their A game all the time. They try to say like, like if I could only, make my best decisions all the time, then like things would be easy. But the key here is that that's not possible, right? This distribution is always going to be here. There's going to be things that you're solid on, there's going to be things that you're working on, and there's going to be things that you still need to polish, right? And so a lot of people, I think, too, when you think about like rank, I think this too is another place that you can see this kind of thing happen, right? Like, let's say that you're like, I don't know, like you're like center elo, right? Is like plat 2 or something like that, right? You know, you might go up to plat 1, plat 150, might even get into series for diamond sometimes, and those will be like, you can think of it as kind of like your A game performance in terms of like rank, right? And then there will be some times that you drift down to, plat 3, maybe even plat 4, right? And those will be your C game. And so a lot of people, when they're hovering in that range, right, what they'll do is they'll identify with their peak rank, right? They'll be like, like my true rank, right, is like the highest that I've reached, and anything less than that is, just like a fluke. Like, I don't know why I'm still here, right? Like, I've already proved that I can get there, right? And when you think in that way, then it's like when it just kind of, everything feels mediocre to bad, basically, because you look at your A game and you're like, aha, this is what I expect, right? Finally, is kind of the sensation.
Yeah.
Then when you actually play your B game, which is what happens most of the time, to be clear, right? Like in this like 60% of your game, you're like, I kind of like messed up. I didn't do really all that great, And then you look at your C game, when you make the really bad mistakes, and you're like, oh my god, I have no idea how I could ever possibly have made these mistakes. It doesn't make any sense. I don't know where this comes from. It's so frustrating, right? Yeah. Where so that's what, and so it's basically like A is considered normal, B is kind of bad, and C is terrible, right? Mm-hmm. Where if you can learn to actually, take yourself for where you're at, and be and kind of like learn to accept that, then what happens is you start to like identify more with your B game, right? And so that 60% of the time that you do fine, you're like, not bad, When you have a C game, you're like, it wasn't, that wasn't great, right? In fact, it may have even been bad. But then you get to have these moments where you actually watch yourself make good plays in your A game, and do your best, and you actually get to be excited and happy about those. You actually get a positive end of the spectrum. Isn't that crazy? So not only do you no longer feel absolutely crushed by your C games, but you also get to kind of celebrate your A games. So that's one thing that can be, one mindset that can be really positive to build and to develop, right? Is to kind of evaluate where you are in your game, try to figure out, like what each of these look like for you, so that you can start to kind of be more gentle with yourself in terms of understanding, where your performance is at, and what you should be expecting of yourself, right? So that's one thing. But the reason that they call it the inchworm model is because of how these of how like these buckets kind of change over time, right? So let's say, that this is like your inchworm right now, right? Okay. And let's say that you learn some new skills, right? You push some stuff that was maybe in stage 1 of the adult learning model up into stages like 2 and 3. Or you take something from 2 to 3. Let's put it that way, right? What do you suspect is going to happen to this inchworm? What do you think will happen to the shape of the graph?
I think it's going to be like getting broader, so like the the edges get changed, but like the middle part which is like okay, it's good. Like it's a wrong model, like like how you normally play is not going to change a lot. Maybe get a bit wider, but like the edges, I think are the parts where changes will be the most visible.
Yeah. So something like this is basically what we're expecting to see. So what you described is kind of like, you expect like the right edge to kind of come out because you've like
Yep.
learned a new skill. So clearly your A game gets better. But maybe your B and C games stay the same. What we'll say is actually your A game is going to get better. Your B game is actually going to get less frequent. Because now that you have these new skills that you're working on, what used to be your old B game, you actually don't play it that much anymore. Because now you've got these new things that you're working on in your A game, and your A game is going to happen because there's a higher like range of possible things that can happen. What we'll consider to be your A game is going to kind of happen a larger percent of the time, and the C game is also going to happen like a larger percentage of the time while you're in this kind of a space, right? And the overall feeling here is that you start to feel kind of coin flippy, right? Your best games are really good, and your worst games are really bad because, like you said, right? Your worst games don't actually move if you learn new skills. It doesn't help at all, really, if you're going from stage 2 to stage 3 on the adult learning model. But then, if you move something from stage 3, conscious competence, to stage 4, unconscious competence, what do you suspect would happen to the inchworm then?
Considering like you don't have to think about it anymore, I think C game would get less,
Yes.
and like A and B would get more
Yeah.
frequently.
So, essentially this. It, like, tightens back up again, right? Your old C game kind of goes away. You tighten up, you become more consistent. Your B game starts to happen a lot more, and your what used to be your A game in your old inchworm, is also now happening, like, more consistently. So, this is why they call it the inchworm model, because it's a model of how your skill changes over time as you move different things through different parts of the adult learning model. It moves like an inchworm. See that?
Yeah.
So, this is another really important thing because there, we already kind of talked about it even, but there are a couple of mistakes that you can make here as well that will cause you to have problems, right? If all that you do is learn new skills, right, then this just keeps getting wider and wider and wider and wider and wider and wider and wider forever, right?
Yeah,
And
sure.
your C game never moves anywhere. Your A game keeps getting better and better and better. And the thing about League of Legends, right, is that it does not reward like the degree to which you win. The outcome of a game is binary. It's either a win or a loss, right? And so if you, I don't know, like let's say you like absolutely smash, like not close, destroy like 45% of your games, right? And then 55% of your games you almost win but barely lose, right? You're still actually losing elo when you do that.
Yeah,
Right.
because like I'm losing more than I win.
Exactly. And so more and if you contrast this with something like maybe like poker or like TFT even, right? In TFT, the amount that you win by actually determines your elo gains, right? Like if you place first, that's very different than placing fourth, right? Even though they're both technically winning because you top forward, right? So in League, having a wide inchworm like this isn't actually gonna, this compared to this doesn't actually do a whole lot to change your elo, right? Like you might have actually gotten significantly better, had some like seriously cool new skills that you've learned, and because the actual like bulk of the distribution has only gone from like, I don't know, like here at like 3 to like roughly here at like like maybe 5, like you don't realize very many of the benefits of having learned all this new stuff, because like if you look, right, like like 1 2 3 4 5 6, like we're the top end of your ranges starts at like a 6, right? And then 7 8 9 10 11 12 13 14 15 even, right? You might say your A game went from like 6 to 15, right? and you would expect that that would move your rank quite a bit.
Well, as the C game also is more, as you said before, it's not gonna help a lot because I'm still losing like
Yeah,
roughly the same amount.
exactly. And so because you're still losing the same amount and you're still losing with roughly the same frequency, right? The bulk of your distribution, your B game has only moved from 4 to like 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Only a move of 3,
Hmm.
right? And so, because your C game is really what's going to, or not your C game, because your B game is generally what is going to actually determine like what the center of your like kind of rank wobble is, that's going to really, that movement of 3 is what you're actually going to see in your rank, right? And that's why, it can feel like you improve a lot, but maybe your rank doesn't change very much, right? And that's why this makes sense. So one mistake that you can make is only working on your A game, only working on learning new skills, right? And if you do that, this is roughly what you'll see, right? You'll see a little bit of movement in your rank. You'll feel like your best games have gotten way better, and they have, but because the consistency isn't there, it doesn't actually move your rank that much. Another mistake that you can make is only working on your C game, only working on tightening up what you already have and never working on learning new stuff, right? And you'll see this kind of thing happen, especially a lot to like veteran players, right? People who've been playing for a long time, myself included, who kind of develop this sense that they like already know what they need to know, right? And like stop looking for new things to learn, right? If you stop working on your game entirely and you're just kind of like playing and practicing what it is that you already know, then yeah, you'll get more and more and more consistent. You'll get more and more ingrained in the habits that you already have, but it won't actually ever move the top of your range up. And so you'll improve up to a point, but then once you become super consistent here, you'll stop moving. This will just continue to get closer and closer and closer together until like your elo is exactly like Diamond 4 76 LP. Like that's your elo exactly, right? And you literally go like win lose win lose win lose. Doesn't actually happen, but like that's that's the theoretical limit, right? Is something like that. You get a really really tight distribution. Now, so inherent in these two mistakes is kind of what we should be aiming to do, right? We need to be trying to alternate learning new skills and really solidifying, practicing those skills that you already have. And that's what's going to allow this whole distribution to move up, right? Because, and this kind of addresses the myth of like only playing your A game, right? Like that's how you climb, right? Like a lot of people will say like, oh, like you just need to like try harder, right? Like you just need to like play better, right? But that's not actually it, right? If you try harder, right, what's going to happen is you'll play your A game more, but it's super effortful, and at some point
You're stuck.
you just won't. You're just stuck, right? And you're trying really hard, but you're still stuck because you're all that you're doing is shifting it a little bit to the right?
Or you burn out and quit the game.
Yeah, and then you burn out, you quit the game. It goes, and then it's like only C game for like 50 games, and then you lose all of the elo that you gained, and become really frustrated and dejected. Yeah, right. We've all done this, right? Like this happens to everybody.
Yeah.
So the key thing to remember here is that you have to actually learn stuff, right? Learning both, practicing things that you're currently bad at and learning new stuff that you had no idea about. These are the activities that are actually going to change what this distribution looks like. It's going to eventually move your entire distribution, completely away, to the point where your new C game is better than your old A game ever was, right? Mm-hmm. And at that point, you don't have to try to play your A game. You don't have to play really clean. You don't have to play excellently every game by your own standards. You just have to play reasonably. You have to play like what you are solid on, and just playing your B game will cause you to climb without effort. You can't help but go up at that point. Because if your B game is better than everybody else's B game, then on average you'll win. That's kind of how it works, right? Mm-hmm. So the reason that I talk about these things is, and perhaps I should have gone into that first actually, is because when we look at tilt, right,
Yeah.
most of the time what's going on is, or well, let's talk about what like tilt is, right? So I think it's pretty reasonable to say that tilt is like primarily centered in like frustration or anger. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we look at frustration, what that is you have some kind of a goal and you're trying to get there and you're not getting there, right? And you don't understand why, right? So the way that you address tilt is once again by learning. It's by understanding and setting up proper expectations for yourself and for others that then allow you to expect what's actually going to happen. And when you like learn to do this and you learn to think about the situation in this different way, suddenly the situations that would cause you frustration before no longer cause you frustration, right? Because you realize that they're not actually preventing you from reaching your goal or working towards it, or you realize that there's nothing that you can do, and that's not like that's not a sense of like hopelessness. It's a sense of freedom, right? It's like, oh, if there's nothing I can do about this, I don't need to worry about it, right? And like once that like clicks internally, that can make it feel a lot easier to handle. So, the next thing that I want to talk about is, I think, this. Yeah. So, this is a model that we'll call the malfunctioning mind, right? And the essential idea is that you can think of your mind as kind of being roughly separated into like these three buckets, right? You know, at the like the highest layer of abstraction is your thinking, right? And this is where you do all of your planning. This is where you do all of your learning. And it's a big part of what allows you to actually play your A game, right? If there's stuff that you're currently like working on learning, right? The thinking is where it's going to happen, right? Underneath that, you have your emotions, right? And these are going to react to so one thing that's good to note is that your emotions are going to react first to any given situation, right? If something happens to you, your first reaction is going to be an emotional one. Then the thinking starts going after that. And then finally we'll have like the unconscious, right? Which is, you know, all of your motor functions, you know, your heartbeat, these sorts of things, right? Your breathing, right? So here's kind of the question, right? When your emotion goes into overdrive, right? Because of some kind of situation that happened, right? What do you think happens to the rest of the mind?
They played around. I thought it was the second round I was watching, but not everybody finished, so they just counted the first round, and then it was canceled. Okay.
Like I think if it's only then only the emotions are doing something. Like the rest of the mind isn't doing anything into to that given situation. I think.
Exactly, right? Essentially what will happen is your thinking shuts off, right? Until the emotion is dealt with, until something fixes this middle layer, thinking is essentially inaccessible, right? And this is not a moral failing, this is a biological fact, right? If you actually go and like look at like the neurochemistry involved there, like it's pretty interesting, and evolutionarily you can understand kind of why this makes sense, right? Emotions are there to or like negative emotions are there to protect us, right? From various threats out there in the world, right? When you feel scared, it is because, evolutionarily, it is because your life is in danger and you need to, like, go the other way, right? And so feeling that and, like, getting us, that sense of, like, I'm in danger, I need to run away, needs to be stronger than your intellectual curiosity about the situation. You know what I mean? And so any kind of thinking that you'll have is going to shut off until you feel safe again. And once you feel safe again, then you're allowed to think. Then you're allowed to ponder. So what does this mean for us? It means one very simple thing. If you are already tilted,
That's gonna be a hard
it's too late.
pill.
There is not really anything that you can do at that point.
That's a
Because
decent part of my
your thinking is
life,
turned off.
my entertainment life, my
Right?
life.
And
But
tons and tons and tons and tons of strategies for how you should deal with tilt are... They seem to misunderstand this. They seem to say, like, it's real easy to think when you're tilted, you should just remember this, remember that, while you're already, like, super frustrated. And the fact of the matter is, that is not just difficult, it can be impossible if your emotions are running high enough, right? It's not like they're on or off, right? It's not binary. But once you get past, like, a certain threshold of emotion, you're kind of... like, it's going to control you more than you're going to control it, right? So this leads us to a really important conclusion, and that is, if you want to fix your tilt problem, you need to be able to work on controlling and addressing it before you get to the point where you're so tilted that you can't think anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the good news is that this is actually quite doable. It's a skill that you can learn, right? And the method that you're going to use to control your emotions is going to be thinking, and you need to be thinking about the right thing when you notice that you're, like, at risk for running high emotional, right? So the general strategy is going to look something like this, right? First of all, you need to actually recognize that you are in a situation that can cause you to tilt, right? Ideally, you need to recognize it before you are actually feeling much of anything at all, right? Mm-hmm. And this is one of, if not the most important step, right? If you can't actually recognize what it is that is causing you to feel the way that you feel, then you can't really do anything about it, right? So there's a whole other strategy that we'll talk about second that addresses, like, how you do that, right? The second thing that you're going to want to do, once you do recognize that you're in a situation that can cause you frustration, right, is you want to take a deep breath. And this is because the mind and the body are very deeply connected in ways that, we don't really understand fully, right? But we can observe kind of what those connections are. And one of the things that we've observed is, that when you take a deep breath, it helps you to kind of take a step back and put a little distance in between yourself and your emotions, right? You can kind of observe your own mind and say something like, my mind is feeling emotions right now, right? And when you do that, you're creating distance between you and your mind, right? Your identity or your self or something like that is distinct from what it is that you feel, right? And once you create that gap, once you create that distance, that's what allows you to then get in there and start actually doing something, right? So the thing that you're going to do, and this is what I'll call, like, the active ingredient, right? Like, when there's, like, toothpaste, there's, like, fluoride, and the fluoride is, like, what makes it effective, right? Like, this is the step that, like, makes you feel better. This is the active ingredient in the strategy here. Injecting logic, right? You need to remind yourself in this moment why you don't need to feel frustrated, right? Why this situation is fine, acceptable, accepted, or expected, and how it's like okay, you know what I mean? And we'll talk at length about how you figure out what this is, how you figure out what to logic inject and what to say. That's another really important conversation. But this is kind of the big thing here. So if this works, right, if you do it correctly, if you catch it early enough before you're already tilted, and you have the right thing to say to yourself, then when you say this to yourself, it makes you feel better, right? So that once you feel better, then you move on to strategic reminder. And this idea is like above and beyond feeling better. The reason that you're trying to stop your tilt is because you're playing League of Legends and you need to actually like win the game, right? You need to actually perform. So what you'll find is that very often, if you have certain mental problems, right, they will kind of correspond almost one-to-one with mistakes that you make in game, right? That's why we want to fix tilt, is because it causes you to make mistakes in game, right? So the strategic reminder is, what mistakes do I usually make, and how do I from like a strategic perspective avoid making them, right? What do I need to remind myself not to do, or to do, right? Like for some people, if you get frustrated, like your map awareness goes to garbage, right? So maybe like a strategic reminder would be, look at your map. You know, it can be that simple, right? But it's just like a nice, short, simple instruction that kind of gets your head back in the place that it's supposed to be, and back into the flow of the action, right? So these first four are kind of really the big ones. This is kind of the real process, right? Recognize that you're in a bad spot. Take a deep breath to give yourself that distance so that you can actually get in there and work. Remember your logic and why you don't need to feel frustrated. And then strategically remind yourself of what you should focus on, what you need to be doing now. Right? Make sense so far? Any questions?
Yeah. So far not.
Okay. So then the fifth step is just repeat the first four steps as needed, right? Multiple situations can happen in a game that cause you to feel frustrated. They might need the same logic injection, they might need a different one, right? So just because you've done it once doesn't mean that it worked. You may have to do it multiple times, right? And then sixth and finally is quit, right? If you do find yourself in a position where you can recognize that your emotions have already gone past the threshold and you're already feeling like really tilted, and you don't think that any amount of logic injection can recover you, at that point you should quit, right? And quitting is a skill, because your tilt is going to tell you to keep playing. It's going to tell you to stick it to him, you know, like get that elo back that you lost, that kind of thing, right? And so it'll be against your instincts to stop, but if you still have enough control to do it, then you can save yourself a lot of LP, learning when to quit, right? Now, this said, quitting shouldn't be a solution that you're happy to rely on, right? If you continuously find yourself getting really tilted, and then, you know, you don't really work on figuring out how to, you know, be at peace with these situations, then you'll be quitting a lot of the time, and you'll be losing LP that you could have gained if you were playing, right? So, you know, like working on the tilt does still matter, right? Like quitting isn't a long-term solution. This is just like, you know, these are the steps that you take in the short term to, you know, like tread water while you figure out how to fix the underlying problem, which is that these situations make you feel tilted to begin with, right? So, like I say, you know, this kind of leads us to the natural question of like, okay, so, you know, how do I do this most important step, right? How do we inject logic, right? So in order to tailor the logic that we're going to inject to your problems in specific, we're going to use this. This is a process called the mental hand history, right? And it comes, like all of this, by the way, this all comes from a book called The Mental Game of Poker by Jared Tendler. And when he says hand, he doesn't mean hand like a like your hand. He means hand like a poker hand, like a set of cards, right? And so when it's a mental hand history, it's the idea that you're kind of reviewing back, like, okay, like what are the different situations that I've been in, right, in my mental state, and what's kind of going on there, right? It's trying to figure out what it is that's going on so that we can try to figure out a new way to think about it that doesn't cause you frustration, right? So we can do this together. I'm going to go ahead and open up OneNote, and we're going to talk about what makes you feel frustrated in your games. So, describe for me what you feel like your biggest frustrations are in the game.
For one, if I make very stupid mistakes, and
Okay.
I'm directly afterwards, why did I do this? And the second is if someone else is flaming, I'm getting really annoyed at it because it's not getting you anywhere. Like, I know that it's not going to work. And feeding teammates.
Beautiful. And so each of these, I think, warrants its own, like, investigation, right? So shall we take these in the order that you listed them? Do these rank in order of, like, kind of like most pressing to least pressing, or which one do you want to do first?
Making stupid mistakes I would do first because that's the one where I'm getting most annoyed at.
Okay, great. So, what to you is a stupid mistake?
For example, if I like accidentally press no, wait a moment. Like a really bad engage, for example, like if I go in without there being any reason for.
So, when you accidentally engage poorly, what makes that stupid?
Because it's a bad engage, like it's making the game harder for me because I'm in a disadvantage in that situation.
Okay. Right. So it's making the game harder for you. How is it making the game harder for you?
A bad engage either ends with me dying, giving the enemy 300 gold or more, or more or less about. At the same time, I'm losing gold and experience, or if I survive, I'm still at a disadvantage because I have less HP, potions, or summoners, for example.
Yeah. So, why is it frustrating that the enemy now has a material advantage?
Like, it's making it harder to do something against them, because even if they take a bad trade in that situation, they might even win it because they just have more resources.
So, how things going?
Yeah, so it makes the game harder to
Yeah.
harder to play moving forward, right?
Yeah.
Why is this bad? Why is that frustrating?
Because it can snowball, and that can lead to me feeling like I can't do anything anymore.
Okay. And why is that frustrating?
Because, like, if you can have to just sit there and can't do anything about what's happening, it's not feeling like you have any control about it, and like it's frustrating to not be able to do anything.
So, what do you feel powerless or like you don't have control to do?
Right.
Can you repeat? I didn't really understand what you mean.
What is it that you're in those moments where you feel like you can't do anything? What exactly do you feel powerless to do? What do you feel like you don't have control over?
Like, I can't really do anything against the enemy at that point because he just, like, right clicks on me and walks to me and I die. So I have, like, no real way to prevent them from doing what they want, like forcing an objective.
So this is kind of circling back around into like what's like happening in the game, but I'd like to kind of make this point, right? At what feels bad is that it becomes harder to win, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So, but this may not actually be the real root of your frustration, right? So, which is I'll put it this way: which is more frustrating, a game where you do like poorly and become like really weak and like the game is decided by other people, but you end up winning, or a game where you have like full control, like you get really fed, and then you lose anyway. Which of those is more frustrating, or are they both equally frustrating?
For me, personally, the first one's more frustrating because, like, I really hate if I can't do anything and at the same time I'm thinking to myself in that game that I'm a burden to my teammates.
Okay. So, there's a lot to unpack here. I'll start with that. So, this, first step of like, we list out like, okay, like, here's kind of what I'm doing and like, why is that frustrating? Why is that frustrating? We just keep asking why over and over and over and over and over and over, right? We eventually get down to, something like these sorts of things, right? And in fact, let's go even deeper. Why is it frustrating to be a burden to your teammates?
Because I'm feeling bad because they have to work harder to make up for my inability to do anything at that point. So it's getting harder to win the game because of it. Because they have to play a 4v5 at that point if I'm too weak
What's
to do
wrong with that?
anything. The thing, like, for me, it just feels bad to put others in these situations because I don't want to be in them myself. So, like, I feel bad if I put another person in it.
I don't want to be in games where other people feed, so I feel bad when I put others in that same situation. Certainly. So let's actually pivot here, and let's go down to feeding teammates, right? Because we've actually kind of just looped around into this,
Yeah.
right? So, what's wrong with feeding teammates? Why is that frustrating?
Like, first of all, because it's making the game harder again. Because someone else is really weak and the enemies might be pretty strong. So they can force stuff. And it's just annoying because, like, just, for example, stuff happens like they just died. The enemy backed and has like a 300-400 gold advantage and even a level advantage. They still continue on fighting even though they just lost with better odds.
Is that accurate? It's annoying when they don't react properly to their death? Sure. So, what's wrong with the game being harder? Why is that frustrating?
Because you have to put in more work into a game than you need to, so you have to concentrate more, which is getting tiresome if you have to do it for too long, and like in multiple games in a row, for example. Because you have to actually focus more than you would normally do, because you have to balance out that someone in your team is weak and an enemy is strong.
Do you often feel like tired out after playing a lot of games?
It depends on whether I play with someone or not, because like if I'm on my own, like I'm trying to completely concentrate on feeling out. But if like with a friend, at some point I'm like having fun over it, and that makes it easier for me to concentrate again because like I can cool down for a few moments. So it
Hmm.
depends.
So you have some sense that your emotional state is part of what's making it easier or more difficult to focus. Is that true?
Yeah. So now that
Yeah.
I think about, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because when you're with a friend and the game is kind of more fun,
I didn't
it
quite
seems to
hear
be
that.
easier to kind of catch your breath and to kind of refocus and to focus for longer. Why do you
Oh,
think that
wow.
is?
Yeah.
Because
Uh-huh.
it
I
puts
mean,
you have one person you know how they play. So like you have only 8 other people in the game you don't know how they play. So you have the advantage that you have one other consistent player next to you, and also it's easier I think for me personally because they with my friends I can just talk if I'm annoyed, like to just focus my mind on something else.
So I think what I really wanted to ask was more along the lines of like, why does having somebody there with you who you can talk to and who you can do these things with, right? Who you can rely on, why does
Yeah.
that make it easier to focus? I'll give you a hint. The answer is actually something that we already talked about today. Just a few minutes earlier.
uh-huh. Making the kits, right? Yeah.
So we talked um, just a moment ago about how there's this kind of connection between your emotional state and how easy it is to focus and to concentrate, right? What does that sound like?
Oh, so
Yeah.
like because I'm talking to someone, I know,
Uh-huh.
like my emotional state changes again to like not being so tilted because like it hasn't had to do anything with them, so like it changes it, I think.
Oh. Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I would understand it.
It's something along the lines of like being with a
You're
friend
saying this
puts
is
you
when
more
they
at
show
ease,
up or
right?
before they
You feel like you
Yeah.
have
before they
somebody
show
that you can trust,
Uh-huh.
right? And
Hmm.
when you feel like you have somebody that you can trust, you don't get as frustrated. When you don't get as
Right.
frustrated, it's easier to concentrate, right? So I'm just kind of
Right.
like
Right, exactly.
bringing up like this point here, right? If you feel really frustrated, it's very difficult
Yeah.
to focus and to concentrate and to think, right?
Right.
If you
Hmm.
don't feel frustrated, then you might be put in pretty much the same situation, right? But
Right.
your reaction to it is going
Yeah.
to be different because you don't have that like emotion there
Right.
that's causing you to like have a clouded head. You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
So
I
this
think.
this kind of, it's not to say that this like helps us figure out like what logic you need to inject, but like this does explain one of the experiences you've already kind of had, right? Which is maybe a little bit harder to kind of understand before. Like, why is it easier to focus if somebody else is there? Wouldn't it be harder to focus because you need to talk to them instead of just like being in your own head? Like, that doesn't make sense, right? But that's why. It's because if being with a friend helps you stay more emotionally centered, then that is helping you to stay focused, right? So it's like that's like the cause in between there, right? That's making sure that the effect happens. Anyway, so it's tiring to concentrate. When you're in a long game, right, like a 50-minuter, right,
Yeah.
that is like super duper difficult and like you have to concentrate, but it's like close, right? Like it's not like you're behind. It's just like really close and really tense, right? Do you tend to enjoy that experience, or does that tend to be annoying to you?
So I enjoy it personally, but afterwards I always have to take a break because I know I can't do another game like that again
Yeah,
directly afterwards. I needed
totally,
like
totally understand.
5 minutes
Yeah.
pause or something.
So, what's the difference between enjoying that kind of concentration and not enjoying this kind of concentration?
Like in this long 50-minute game where it's like more or less balanced, it really feels like you have an impact because if you make a mistake, your team gets punished, but if you play well, the enemy team gets punished for it, maybe. If you played really well, but like if you have to concentrate because someone is feeding, it's just arbitrarily difficult for you because like the enemy just has like stats make it if you don't play perfectly nearly impossible for you to kill them. So it's just annoying because you have to do it over and over and over again whenever you see that the enemy, not just in like this 50-minute game example in like team fights, because that's like the main turning points in such long games. It's actually I think far as my experience goes,
Okay.
but it's just feels like it's not fun anymore because you are not even with your enemy, but rather like he has an advantage, so he doesn't have to concentrate, but you have to concentrate to even try to kill him. And if he like really concentrates, it might even be not possible.
Okay. Now we're getting somewhere I think that's really interesting. So I'm going to pick out three things that you just said that I think are really, really, really interesting. So one is that you
Okay.
said that it's arbitrarily difficult now because somebody
Yeah,
is fed. So what makes it arbitrary?
because like it could have easily been avoided if the person wouldn't have been feeding, because like he was getting weaker and weaker and still continued on fighting. So like I'm thinking if he wouldn't have done that, the enemy wouldn't have gotten so fat. Sure, he would have been ahead. That can happen. That's
Is it
not bad,
actually
but like,
easy? Is that true?
I mean, not always, but like sometimes it's just it's easy. Would have been easy to avoid if you like not just go in, die, go back to lane. Enemy has an advantage, go in again. And like in these situations, I'm
Why did
getting
he
annoyed at
go in a
people
second time?
because if thought he would win, but like I'm not getting annoyed
Why
after
did he
two
think he would
times, but
win?
like because the either didn't thought about the enemy having more items, or like he doesn't know the matchup well enough, or like there's a lot of reasons for it. Actually, like could also have been just that he just hit a power spike because like level 5 power spike or level 6 power spike depending on champions. And then like he thought now that even though the enemy has an item advantage, I still can win because I play better.
Sure. So, is the decision of whether or not to go in an easy one?
The decision, not really, because I think personally,
I agree. I think it's really difficult. So, what makes it feel like it could have been easily avoided?
like that's a feeling I only really have if they go like in 5 or 6 times and still die every time. Like after the third time, I think they at some point should have gotten the message that they can't win anymore,
So, you're
and
seeing
then
a
I'm really
pattern.
annoyed at them.
You're seeing a pattern that you feel like they don't see, and it feels obvious to you, right?
Yeah,
Is it actually obvious?
for me it is, but maybe it isn't for them.
Why not?
But like it's hard. Could be multiple reasons. Like maybe I know how strong the enemy champion is with their items, and they don't. Or like,
So, there could be a knowledge gap, right?
yeah, like there could be a lot of reasons for it, maybe.
Yeah, there could be a knowledge gap
Or they
between
or they
you
feel
and them.
pressured to.
The
They
decision
could also feel pressured to. Okay.
of whether or not to go in is difficult to begin with. And then, what were you just saying? They might feel pressured.
Yeah, because like they want to close the gap between them and the enemy, so like they don't get snowballed on.
make up for their
Because then
mistake.
they would be in Because then they would also be in a situation at some point, maybe have a fear that they're in a situation where they can't do anything anymore and just get dove over and over again.
Maybe they
So
feel
they
like
try
they
to-
let their team down and they're trying to make it up to them.
Yeah, something like along those lines.
So, one of the key things to realize here, I think, is that League of Legends is a really hard game. Like, objectively, it is very difficult to play League of Legends well. Almost all of the decisions that we think of as simple, as relatively advanced players, are actually not even remotely simple at all, right? Like, when's the last time that you tried to explain how to play League of Legends to your parents? Okay? Right? Can't be
Yeah.
done, okay? You just can't explain it. There's too much, right? Like trying to explain like why you did something to somebody who hasn't played the game for like 4 years is just a nightmare. Like there's so many factors that you're taking in. There's so many different things that go into every single decision. So much knowledge, you know? When was the last time that you thought about the fact that you probably know like roughly the text of like every champion's ability in this game?
I think that was like beginning of last season.
Yeah, right? Like you know so much. You know so much. And the player that you're thinking about here, right? This like this person who's feeding also knows so much, right? And because there is so much to know, it is really, really, really easy for there to be a knowledge gap, right? ELO does not match people who are identical together. It matches people with identical performance together. And, or not identical, but similar, right? And you can achieve similar performance with very, very, very different skill sets, right? Like, you can get gold on support and you can get gold on jungle, like, as a very trivial example, right? Like, clearly those players know very different things, right? So, very, very often there is a knowledge gap, and what feels obvious to you actually isn't obvious at all, right? So that's one thing to recognize, right? Is that it isn't actually obvious, right? Even if it might look simple to you, there's a really good chance that they don't know it, right? The decision is difficult to begin with, right? Regardless of whether or not it's actually like, you know, easy to see the pattern or not, even if you do see the pattern, you might still make the wrong decision. You know?
Because you think like they make some mistake and you can
Yeah.
capitalize on it.
Yeah. And, even you might know that you're behind, but you might think that they have made a mistake that is like big enough that it doesn't matter that you're behind, you can still capitalize on it. And if you can capitalize on it, it's correct to capitalize on it. So they might just make multiple mistakes in a row. That happens, right? And then this one I think is probably the most interesting, right? They might feel pressured to close the gap, to make up for their mistake. They might be frustrated that they just made a mistake. And they might make another mistake because they're frustrated, because their mind is malfunctioning and they can no longer think. They are just like you. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, in light of all of this, do you see why I maybe question this phrasing of arbitrarily difficult?
Yeah.
It definitely makes the game harder, but I don't think it makes it arbitrarily harder. I think that this is a perfectly natural and actually quite important part of what makes the game difficult. Right? When you have teammates that are doing well or doing poorly, that's part of the game, right? Think about what your expectation is, right? When you like come into a game of League of Legends, do you expect every player on your team to play well?
Not I don't expect them to play well by my standards, but by their standards, because like they can't go beyond what they can do. Like I don't expect them to be like perfect, because
Is that
they might
the answer that you're
might-
giving me after having thought about it, or is that what your intuition said?
I like the first for me personally, it's like I know they might know different things better or worse than me, so I don't expect them to do everything as good as I am at. So like it's okay, but like I expect people to do the best they can, personally.
Okay. So you expect other people to play their A game.
Yeah, like if I play a ranked, I'm going in to win, so I go in with expectation that the other players are doing that as well.
Okay. So um, what's perhaps unrealistic about that expectation that everybody should play their A game when they're playing with you?
I didn't mean my like the A game, but I rather mean it like not like they are doing as not like the A game because that's way too hard to maintain the entire time. But
Isn't that
more
exactly
of
what you
like
meant, though?
I think I phrased it wrong.
Okay. So how
So
would you
I
rephrase it?
so okay, let me think a moment about that. No, I think careful. So like expect them to try to win at least. So they do what they can to win the game.
So you expect them to try to win.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that a reasonable expectation?
I mean, if I go into a game, into a competitive game, and I don't want to win, I'm so like in a ranked with like it's more or less trolling if you don't try to win because like you are ruining the game for four other people who might want to win. I think personally, like not in a normal game, of course. There's also like stuff like learning new
Okay.
champions in there, so
Sure.
I don't go normal
Is it
games with that.
reasonable to expect everyone to play to win in a ranked game?
I think personally,
Okay, you think that's reasonable. I disagree. I don't actually think that's reasonable to expect, and here's why. So, when we think about expectations, I think the only thing that makes sense to expect is what's likely to actually happen. Right?
mm
So, like, I don't know, like if I'm planning like a picnic, okay, and I see that, and like the date's already been set, right, and like we start coming up on it, right, and I read in the weather forecast that it's going to be cloudy that day, right,
mm
and then I still expect it to be sunny because it should be sunny for a picnic, right,
mm
and then it's cloudy and I get frustrated. Does that make sense? Is that reasonable?
No.
No. So, why do people give up?
Probably because of tilt most of the time.
Sure. Is it reasonable to expect nobody to ever tilt?
No.
No. Right? Bad weather happens. People hit their C game. And I think part of what's going to help you is, like I say, I think you actually are expecting people to play their A game. Or maybe you're not expecting people to play their A game every game, but you're expecting people to never play their C games. Right? B or higher only. Not allowed to play C games. Right? And so part of what is going to help you is accepting that in some portion of your games, some portion of the players are going to tilt. They're going to play their C games. This is something that you should learn to expect. Right?
Okay.
And learning to expect it is actually going to help you to think about that situation in a different way. Right? Instead of feeling like it makes the game arbitrarily difficult and not fun and like, now you have to do all this extra work, right? Think of it like this, right? When you think about the best players in the world, right? Do you think that they can't handle a player tilting in their games?
I think they can handle it
Okay.
because they expect it to happen at some point. Because
Yeah. And when it does happen, what does it mean for them? What do they focus on?
I have no idea.
Okay. So that's something that'll be kind of interesting to explore. What do we actually what should we actually think about? What should we actually do when somebody tilts? Right? And this again will come back to like the notion of like, you know, frustration is you're trying to do something and you don't know how to do it, right? Like if you're trying to win and while you're trying to win somebody is tilting, right? And you don't know how to respond to that, naturally that'll cause frustration, right? It's made it more difficult for you and you don't know what you're supposed to do about it, right? So that I think is a really important conversation that we should have real soon, right? Like,
Okay.
I'll go ahead and put this up here. Like, what should we actually do when someone is tilting? In game. Just putting a pin in this question. We'll come back to it later. So, I just need to think for a second. Give me a moment.
Okay.
Okay, so here's my next question. So when imagine that you like now go into a game and let me back up. Let me back. Do you feel like you are actually able to change your expectation of like what your teammates are going to do, right? Having talked about this now, do you actually feel like you can now expect that some amount of the time your teammates are going to tilt and that they're going to play your C game? Does that like make sense to you why it's like good to expect that, and do you feel like you can
It makes
expect
sense
that
to
now?
me, but like before I can like do that in game, so like have it mentally like I would have to remember myself every time before it like
Yes.
goes subconsciously. So,
Right.
but I think I could do it.
Okay, so if you imagine yourself being in a game and somebody starts to tilt, and if you were to recognize that and to then say to yourself like, this is expected to happen some of the time, right?
Mhm.
Does that feel like it would be comforting in that moment? Does it feel like it would make you feel a little bit better about that situation?
So at the beginning probably not because it would is something weird to think, but like if I over time I think it would be like comforting because I expect it, so it's not annoying anymore.
Okay.
Just something that has happens
Right.
from time to time, and you can't do anything about it, most
Yeah.
likely.
Yeah. So yeah, if it's reasonable to expect it and you know that you know that you can't do anything about it, or you know we'll talk about like what you can actually do about it, right? If there is something that you can do. But yeah, for the moment, let's just assume that there is a, you know, you with your current set of skills, there's nothing you can do about it, right? And we'll
Hmm.
say, you know, from that kind of a perspective, if like a 0 is how you felt before this conversation and a 10 would be feeling absolutely no frustration at it whatsoever, where do you feel like you're going to land like now? Like how much of this, what level of frustration do you currently feel when you think about that situation, right? And there's no
Um,
right or wrong answer here. I'm not expecting you to say that it's like any easier or any
which one
worse.
was zero again?
We'll say we'll reverse it. We'll make it more easily. 0 is you
Okay.
feel unbelievably tilted. 10 is you feel fantastic, right? So
Okay.
where did you start? You know, and
I
where
think
are you now?
at a 4.
So
I
you
started
started at like a 4, and where do you feel like that situation is going to put you now? Just estimating it.
I guess 6 or 7.
6 or 7. Okay, that's actually a pretty good movement. That's more than I was expecting, given kind of like the tone that you've had.
So at the beginning, I think I would be more like a 5, but over time, when I get more comfortable with this feeling, moving more to a 6.
Okay, that's more in line with what I was thinking, kind of like from like a 4 to a 5.
Yeah,
So
I forgot the part of 5. Sorry.
yeah, so and that's fine, right? Like I'm not I don't need you to like validate that my strategies work for you.
Mhm.
Okay? So like
Okay.
it's okay if this doesn't make you feel better. We're going to keep working until we find something that does, right? So if that moves you from a 4 to a 5, so what part of it still feels frustrating about that situation?
That it's more difficult for me to win the game because an enemy is strong, I think, personally.
So it's more difficult to win because the enemy is strong. Why is that frustrating?
Because you have to put in extra work for something you would have gotten otherwise with less. So you have that goes into you have to I have to concentrate more to make up for it. So and as I said, it's time to concentrate over a very long period of time for me in league. So it's also getting tiring and so I get frustrated more easily if I'm more tired, personally,
Okay. So why do you want to win?
because it feels good and it's more fun to win most of the time.
Okay. I'm gonna need another moment to think. Sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Do you feel like winning should be easy?
No, because like the enemy is probably also trying, so like it should be reasonably difficult and not like
You
completely
paused.
easy.
You paused.
Okay, I
How do you
don't think
feel?
it should be. Ah,
I'm not asking what you think. I'm asking what you feel.
that's-
Do you feel like winning should be easy?
no,
No.
because then you don't have this feeling of success because you did something, but rather if it's easy, it just feels like it should be given to you. So it doesn't feel good anymore because
Okay.
you expect it.
So it's rewarding to overcome challenges, right?
Yeah.
Does it feel rewarding to overcome the challenge of working against an enemy that's fed because your teammate did something stupid?
Yes. So not like if he's so fat it's practically impossible because he's way too fat. But like if he's like 2 or 3, it's like 1,000 gold ahead or so. It feels really good to still beat him. I think personally.
Right. So
So at
I
some
think
point
that's
it's not
really
fun.
interesting. I think that's
It
really
depends.
interesting, right?
Yeah. Okay.
It you've kind of identified, I think, a really important point here, which is that tipping point between like it's fun to overcome an enemy that's a little fed. It's not fun to feel like there's no chance that you can overcome how fed they are. Right?
Yeah.
Which kind of again comes back to this notion of like control, right? Where you like feel powerless, right? And having no control is really frustrating, right? Because you can't win and you don't even feel like you really get to play the game, right? You're being denied the experience that you queued up for, which is to like actually have like a contest, right? Where your choices matter, right? So here's yet another question. Does it make sense to expect that every game of League of Legends, every choice that you make will matter.
No,
Why not?
because there will be games where your choices won't matter. Like your teammate is so fat, he just kills everyone. So like it doesn't matter what you do because your team waits for you.
Mhm.
And there's also games where your teammate feeds. So at some point you might not be able to do anything against the enemy. It just happens sometimes.
Yes. Would League of Legends be a better, more fun game if every decision for every player mattered all the time?
Now that I think about it, I don't actually think so.
You say now that you think about it. So your
Yeah,
your initial reaction was kind of like
yeah,
yes, and then you
like
thought about it
yeah,
and it's no. Explain
because
that for me. Run me through that.
so norm like it would feel good to like if you know your decision has an impact,
Hmm.
but it also would mean that you have to permanently play your A game to win because like because it would just
No lead
happens
is
that
secured.
yeah, so like you stop playing your A game, but the enemy puts up their A games, you lose.
Hmm.
That's
The
would
last
be
move is the only
extremely
one that
tiresome.
matters in that kind of
Yeah,
situation, right?
so it doesn't feel like you get rewarded for playing well in the beginning, but
Yes,
it just matters what you do at the end.
exactly. And so what you find is actually, if you make every decision matter, then in attempting to do that, you actually make most of the decisions not matter,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
In order for the maximum number of decisions to matter, you kind of have to accept that some of them won't. Because some of them not mattering is actually it's the mechanism by which the ones that do matter actually get their mattering. That phrasing is terrible, but I hope you understand what I mean, right?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna try and like write that down, right? So um, decisions don't matter, right? Would the game actually be better if every decision mattered? No, because that would mean the only decision that mattered was the last one, and so paradoxically, fewer decisions would actually matter. So that's kind of an interesting thing to actually run into, right? So if you find yourself now in a situation where the enemy's just going to stat check you, right? Like they've just become fed, right? What related to what we just talked about here? Is there anything that you can say to yourself that makes it feel more acceptable, more okay that that situation is there? What would you say to yourself in
It's
that moment?
it just happened. I know I can't do anything about that, but at the same time, it could have also been the other way around, and it also would at some point it is gonna happen. It's gonna happen to the enemy that it just gets that checked.
Yeah. In order for me to be allowed to stat check enemies, they sometimes must be allowed to stat check me. Right? This is just how the game has to function in order for decisions to matter. Right? So that's, I think, is something that we can actually almost call like a logic injection, right? If you're getting stat checked and you remember that, right? That's gonna, how much better is that gonna make you feel on that same scale of like 0 to 10?
If before it would be still a 4, I would now be at like 7 or 8 because like I know it's still annoying to get stat checked, obviously,
Yeah.
because you can't do anything about it at that
Mm-hmm.
point anymore. But
Yeah.
it feels good to know that the enemies also have the same experience at some point, probably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think again, right? Like, why is it frustrating to have your decisions not matter there?
Because it feels like I don't play the game, because I just stack check, so whatever I do doesn't matter because they just win because they have much higher stats. And that's just annoying because I have no control. I need them to make a mistake, and I don't actually get to play a game.
Mhm.
I would say.
Yeah. So you don't get to play the game, and yeah, you feel like you don't have control. You feel like you don't get to play the game, and at some level you feel like it's like inevitable that you'll lose. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
So I think there is kind of an interesting branch to explore in like, why does losing feel bad, right? You know, and but there's like another branch to explore, which is like, I don't get to play the game, and I think that actually is like, what should we do when the enemies can stat check us, right? Like strategically, right?
Mm-hmm.
How should we actually react to that? Because when the enemy can stat check you, the game isn't over yet. There are actually still quite a few things that you can do. It's just that you can't do things that are proactive, right? You can't walk into them and expect to win. You need to find other ways to gain advantages, right? And a lot of the time this means finding ways to split them up, finding ways to trade objectives as opposed to contest them, right? And figuring out what mistake they need to make for you to come back into the game and putting them in the best position to make that mistake. And those are all kind of vague answers, but does any of that resonate? Do you kind of know what I'm talking about there?
Yeah, I do.
So that's another thing that you can do when you're getting stat checked, right? Is in some ways, like, your logic injection is actually kind of the same as your strategic reminder. You remind yourself that there are actually things that you can still do. You aren't actually powerless in this situation. There are still choices that you make that do matter, right? If you AFK when the enemy can stat check you, you lose for sure. If you put yourself in a position where if they make a mistake, you can capitalize on it and come back into the game, then they might play well, or they might not. And if they don't, suddenly your choice mattered, right? You can't guarantee that your choice will matter. There's only a chance that it will matter. And that feels hard to deal with, right? Because variance is difficult. You know? We don't like our decisions to sometimes matter. That feels really weird and bad.
Yeah.
Right? But that's the way that it is. Right? And we can talk more on why that's frustrating at like a later time. So yeah. Even when they can stat check me, my choices can still matter. The game isn't over yet. Right? And, follow this up with a strategic reminder involving trading objectives, vision play, numbers advantages, identifying the mistake they need to make for you to come back. So, how much does this feel like it helps? Any? Or am I putting...
It sure helps because it's like a reminder that even if the enemy has gotten so fat that it feels like you can't do anything, I remind myself that I still can do something.
Yes. even if they play perfectly, none of the rest of the decisions that you make will matter, right? But you have to remind yourself the chance that they play perfectly is minuscule. It is actually so likely that they will make a mistake. This game is so hard, dude. Like, think about how you feel when you have like an astounding lead, right? And you're like trying not to fuck it up because like you know it's free, but like your teammates are like running in, they're like making the mistake. Think about how bad that feels and recognize that it's so easy for them to do that. Right? Think about how often your team fucks up when you have what's supposed to be like an unlosable lead. That's the same frequency that they'll fuck up. In fact, they'll fuck it up more because they don't have you on their team. They have another random on their team. Right? So. Okay. So we've been talking for a while now. It's been like an hour and a half. We can keep going. I'm still okay to keep going, but I just wanted to like let you know and kind of like give you a chance to dip if you need to dip.
I would want to continue too because
Okay.
it's continuous then.
Excellent. Okay, so what should we cover next?
So getting flamed maybe because like we didn't even start about that point.
Sure, yeah, getting flamed is a good one. Yeah, why not? So, why is getting flamed frustrating?
Because like for me, I think about like, okay, now you're tilting another player. Great, so we have even more players who are tilted. Sure helps us win. And then I'm also get tilted, so like we don't have one tilted player, but maybe two or even three.
So why is that frustrating? Because like it's not logical, right?
Because it doesn't make sense to tilt other players. So like, sure you're annoyed, but then there's one player who may be playing the C game before playing the B game. Then you tilt another player.
Yeah.
And so suddenly there's
now
only
they're
three
playing worse. You're
players
actually
playing
hurting your chances. Totally understand.
And then you get even more tilted and flame even more. So the rest of the team might be also annoyed. And then
So why does that happen? Why do people do that?
Probably to vent their own frustration. So like they don't get
Why do they need
too
to
annoyed.
do that?
Maybe because they know that if they are annoyed, they play worse. So like they try to vent the frustration to stop them from playing so well. From so bad. Oh yeah. Because because it's just
they're not
emotions
thinking.
at that point. Yeah.
They're not thinking. It's not logical because there's no logic.
They
thinking.
didn't think about it.
Even if they know that flaming doesn't help anyone, and let me tell you,
matter at that
everybody
point
knows
anymore.
that flaming doesn't help anybody. Do any of those players that are flaming actually genuinely think that it's going to make their team play better? No! 0% of them think it's going to make their team play better. They don't care. They're angry.
Yeah. Makes sense.
That's what being angry does, is it turns your brain off. Right? They're already doomed. Right? So, get this. Now, I'm gonna do something a little bit mean to you. I'm gonna present to you a solution without actually giving you like all of the tools that you need to use it, right? But think about this, right? So we're talking about like logic injections, right? And like how like thinking can like make you like feel more okay if you can catch it like far enough in advance. I'm gonna blow your mind. You can logic inject for other players in chat. If you see something tilting happening to another player, identify the way in which it would tilt you, come up with a logic injection, and then put that in chat for them to read. You actually anti-flame. You actually have now created a situation where they're going to feel better about themselves, and they're not going to get as frustrated, and they're not going to get into that point where they're tilting other people, right? Is your logic injection always going to work? No. But is it better than doing nothing? Yeah.
Yes.
So, like, when is the last time that you remember somebody in your game, like, watching you, like, hard int? Like, straight up, like, you, like, gank a lane, and you, like, actually just, like the bottom lane, like, you're, like, ganking mid, and, like, it goes so badly that your bottom lane dies too. Like, like, so, by, like, some miracle, they're, like, able to, like, snowball it into that, right? Like, and then your mid laner and bottom lane are, like, it's fine, man, like, we understand. Like, it's
So,
okay.
like, I think that situation happened, like, once?
Yeah, like, once in your entire League of Legends career, okay? This is so broken. Nobody does this. Right? Because think about how you feel when somebody does do that. It's like, huh? Like,
Why?
what do you mean? What do you mean it's okay? That's impossible. No one ever believes that, right? So, like,
Yeah.
you know, it's... If you can... it is such a strong pattern interrupt, if you can actually learn to do it, that, like, it will single-handedly hard carry your games, right? Like, emotional management is actually insane, right? Like, and K9 in the chat asks a really good question. Like, can you give an example of what you would actually say, right? I think what I would say in a situation where, like, somebody, like, messed up a gank is, like, I think I would say it exactly like this. I would say, like, it's okay, man. We've all messed up before. You know what I mean? Like, first, like, validate them, right? Tell them, like, actually, like, the fact that you have made a mistake is neither unexpected nor does it spell doom for our whole team, right? Those are the 2 points that I think it's important to hit them with first, right? Because that's what keeps them from mistake tilting, right? Is recognizing that mistakes are going to happen, and it's fine, right? When they happen, it doesn't mean doom, and, like, we're still in it, right? So, like, that sentiment comes first, right? Is, like, it's okay. You're still my teammate. You messed up, but it's fine, right? Like, that's, like, the first sentiment to get across. The second sentiment to get across is to do the strategic reminder. And so, you know, if it went badly and now they've, like, you know, died, and, like, if you know what the correct move for them is you might say, if they're a strong early game jungler, right, you might say, just focus on ganking other lanes for now, because he's strong now, right? Or you might say, if he's a, like, not a strong early game jungler and, like, there aren't actually any ganks, you might say something like, just farm up, we'll be okay later, right? And so, you know, those two things combined are what's going to really kind of help your chances, right? First, you have to inject the logic to make them actually feel okay. And then second, you provide a nice, clean, strategic reminder, simple instruction that gets them back on the right track and gets them focusing on doing the right thing, right? And sometimes it'll be too late. Sometimes they'll have already played 6 games today and lost all of them, and messed up a gank in every single one of them, and as soon as they mess up the gank in the 7th game, they're just like, fuck this. They'll, like, toss their headset across the room, break their keyboard in half, like, eat it like a Kit Kat, right? Like, sometimes that will happen. And so, you know, it's really important for you as someone actually doing the logic injection to remember that, like, just because you said the right thing doesn't mean that it's gonna work, right? You can say it and they can still tilt, and that's totally fine, right? You don't know how they got to the situation that they are. You don't know that you said the right thing. Maybe they're not tilted about that. Maybe they're tilted because this is their promo series and they really want to get to Diamond. They've been trying for 6 years and they just can't. And so even if it's okay that they messed up, it's not okay because they're going to lose the game now, right? Like, you know, there's many, many, many different ways that the same situation can tilt somebody. So it's, you know, you just kind of have to take a guess, right? And so it's not possible for you to always say the right thing. Your performance, even in logic injecting for other people, is going to have a bell curve, right? Sometimes it's going to work great. Sometimes it's going to work okay. Sometimes it's not going to work at the slightest, right? And so it's important that when you logic inject and it doesn't work for them, that you don't tilt because you didn't do a good enough job of it, right? So that's another thing, right? So, but yeah, I think the most important logic injection for like other people flaming though is like it doesn't make sense because their brain is off. Literally. Right? Like thinking has been abandoned at this point. Logic turned back. There is nothing for you here. Right? At this point, they don't need an explanation of why of you know what they did and why it's wrong and how they can learn from it. That's not going to help them at all, right? What they need is to feel emotionally okay. They need reassurance, right? They need support. And these are things that you can offer, right? So how does that change your relationship with seeing other people flame, if at all? What does it feel like it does for you? Anything?
I think I can say it. Like like now I have. Before I didn't even thought about why they flame, but just about how like it's not getting them anywhere. Like
Mm-hmm.
do I have like another point of view of it? I think I see more clearly why people do it.
Mm-hmm. And does understanding why make it feel more okay that it's happening?
Yes, because like as shown, it's like they don't think about it. So like they're doing it without thinking of the consequence. So like it happens, and that's just the way it is. Like it's the emotions, and like that's not something you can control with like logical thinking. So
Yeah. There's nothing there for it to make sense, and they can't control it. Right? It's already too late for them. Right? And then and then you can note then for the future, right, that maybe there were signs, maybe there were things, look back in the game for the sorts of things that were happening to them that you might have been able to like help them with by logic injecting, right? If that's like the skill that you want to focus on, right? You can remember to look back on the game and see if you can find things that went wrong for them that you could have tried to reassure them about. Right? That's what you could have done. By the time that it's already happening, there's nothing you can do. Don't worry about it. Right?
but
Basically,
you
just
can
like mute them and move on.
learn from it. But you can learn
Yeah.
from to
Yeah.
to do something about another game.
Exactly. Right. If you can learn how to prevent it next game, then it will help you in the future. Exactly. Thanks for the follow, by the way.
No problem.
So, so that, do you feel like that, like, how much does that address getting flamed, right? Were you at a 4 and you've gone to a 7? Like, where are we at now?
I think I'm at a 6 around like now, so like it's still annoying, of course,
Okay.
but like I more understand more why people do it, so it's like not as bad as before anymore.
Okay. And what about it is still annoying?
Just like this, I just really don't like it personally if somebody flames because like it's flaming and I rather have like a clean game.
Hmm.
And it feels
What
like
does
if
that mean?
people-
Can you
if
explain that
peop-
to me?
Like I rather have a game where people flame. I don't have a problem with people flaming, like, but knows me about it as a sad person is like that they make other players tilted. So like that's my gripe with it, and like
Right. So it's not
that's
actually that the fact that they're flaming that's the issue. It's the fact that as a result of their flame, other people are going to play
yeah,
worse.
like because like if it's a way for them to vent or something, like sure, do it, but like it it annoys other people, and then that entire thing begins from before.
So why is it
Because
frustrating that other people are going to play worse?
Because then they are tilted, so like it's harder to win because like they play the C game.
Yeah, it's harder to win.
It goes back, and then
I'm gonna
they
hit you
might
with it.
also
Why
play
do we care about winning? Why do we need
Go-
to win?
because it feels good, I would say. So like
Sure.
that's going back to the first one we talked about.
Yeah. So it feels good to win. Why does it feel good to win?
Nobody likes. It's just for pretty much everyone. It's like they don't like to lose, and they like the feeling of being successful. Trying to achieve what they try.
I think both of those are important to address. So why does nobody like to lose? What's wrong with losing?
So, for some people, for me, it's personally like I feel like if I lose, I'm thinking like, great, I could have done something else in that time, and not a lot would have been lost. Personally.
If I lose, it means that I did something wrong.
Yeah.
Is that accurate? Okay.
Yeah.
So that is what you meant, but is that actually accurate? Is that a true statement? If I lose, it means that I did something wrong.
No, it just feels like it because like you still get experience something, and then you can do it better next time. So it's a learning experience basically, just.
Sure.
But
But
it
at like
feels
a
it's
more
just
literal level, at like a more literal level, is it possible for you to play perfectly and still lose a game of League of Legends?
Yes.
Yeah. Right? So I think that implies very strongly that, like, losing doesn't necessarily mean that you yourself did something wrong. I think we can say that it means that the team as a whole did something wrong, right? But it doesn't necessarily imply that you did something wrong, right? Now, that said, that feeling that you did something wrong is useful to you, right? Because that feeling that you did something wrong is going to cause you to go back and look and to try and find things that you did wrong that you could have done better, right? And that's going to result long term in improvement, right? So it's useful to you, but it's also hurting you, right? It's hurting you because every time that you lose, you feel bad about it, right? And that's like not a pleasant feeling, right? So there is a way, there is a mindset that you can take that is essentially just like you don't, you can have both of those at the same time. You can say, it wasn't my fault that we lost, but I also could have played it better, and I'm going to try and figure out how. Both of those thoughts can exist simultaneously. You see that?
Mm-hmm.
So, like some people, when we like work on this issue, right? Like, they actually feel like really reluctant to even try to fix, like, feeling like, if they lost, that it was their fault, right? Because they feel like they actually like need that in order to like have motivation to improve and to like go back and like look at the stuff, right? But learning to accept that like you are one of 5 players and your influence over the game is not total, right? You can make it more likely that you win, but you can't guarantee anything. Like, that is, I think, important. I'm sorry, I'm like trying to figure out like what my point is here, but like I'm just kind of like talking. Do you kind of see where I'm going with this? Or
Yeah.
not really? Yeah. So, this isn't actually true. You are one of 5 players, and it's totally possible that you are not the primary reason for the loss. Right? And not only is it possible, it's in fact pretty darn likely, right? I'll say, like the trivial example is like if you are one player on 5 and the other 4 AFK, it's pretty freaking hard to win 1v5. I don't think it's possible actually, right? Assuming that the players that are playing against you are like a certain level of player, right? So it's trivial to demonstrate that not every game is winnable, right?
Mhm.
But it's harder to demonstrate that like you played perfectly, right? And that's because most of the time you didn't, right? Most of the time there is something that you could have done to increase your chances, right? So that requires like a different tack when we're thinking about like how do we address that, right? So like I could always have played it better, right? And if I say that, right, like if I say like I could have played it better, right?
Mhm.
When you think about that as like a thought, does that make you feel bad, or do you feel comfortable with that?
It doesn't make me feel bad because you can all like it's as you
If
said,
you
it's
could have
nearly
played it better than you
impossible.
should have, right?
Yeah, like it's always possible to be better than you did because in this situation you might not have enough time. So like you look back on it and think I could have done that and that instead of what I did. So
Mhm.
it it just happened that you could play always more or less always have played something better than you did. It's
Yes.
just normal.
Yes. So I think the thing to recognize in that is like exactly what you said, right? Like that is normal. To have played perfectly is the weird thing. To not be able to find anything that you could have done better is like, huh? Like that's the anomaly. It is absolutely normal and it's absolutely fine to have been able to play it better. In order for you to be able to improve, you need to have been able to play it better, right? And when we think about like overcoming challenges as like part of the main reason that like the game is interesting and fun, right? And like learning as part of the reason that the game is interesting and fun, right? It's like to no longer have anything to learn would make the game boring. Like it literally just becomes One Punch Man the anime, right? Like you're like going around, you're like, no one can beat me. I guess I'll just full combo them again, right? Like,
Yeah.
So if you couldn't have played it better, the game would actually cease to be interesting. And remembering that can make it it can soften the blow of the fact that you could have played it better, right? And there's like a lot of people will also have like more like overarching like goals that they're feeling like they're being denied by the fact that they've like lost. Like a lot of people like want to hit like a certain rank, or they want to like join a team, or they want to like become a streamer, or they want to like go into pro play or something like that. And each of those can make losing just feel bad because you feel like you're getting further away from those. And I don't know if any of those resonate with you, but it's like really easy to get out of that one because you just do exactly what you've been telling me several times already. You just recognize that like winning more is not actually how you get there, right? Winning this game is not going to get you any closer to being a diamond level player, to being somebody good enough that people want to watch them on stream, right? Actually improving at the game is what does that, right? And then the wins just like those are a
Because
result of the improvement that then changes your elo, which
yeah,
helps people realize that you've actually done the learning, right? Like that's
yeah.
the causal chain there, right? So So how do you... If losing still feels bad, why does it feel bad? Does it feel bad?
I'm not really sure, but I think it would not as bad as before, but like
Mm-hmm.
because we could like we're told from like all the time that winning is good, losing is bad. Like it would still feel somewhat bad,
Mm-hmm.
but no, think about like it like this, it wouldn't be as bad. I think
Mm-hmm.
personally,
Okay.
because I just
So...
see it as like okay, I lost, so it might be have been my fault or not.
Mm-hmm.
It happens,
Yeah, either way it's
and
okay.
yeah, and I can see that what I did. I can think about what I did good, what I did wrong, and learn from my mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
So that like the next game where something like this happens, I might be able to turn.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like an experience.
Exactly. So what about that still feels bad? What about that is still frustrating?
If you like, it's frustrating that I try to win because that's what, and then I'm still losing because for some reason,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm thinking about, and then I'm after I what I think about what happened,
Right.
and I think for me it's then
It's
frustrating to
frustrating
see
to
what
not
I
know.
did wrong. Yeah, and if I see it then, I might also sometimes also get frustrated because I think about why did I did this? Like it was obvious it wasn't going to work.
Okay. So that, I think, comes back to the adult learning model, right?
Mhm.
So what do I mean by that, do you think? Do you understand the connection?
Like it's either a skill I don't possess, so I would have to learn it, or something.
Yeah, if you can recognize it though,
Yeah.
then that's
Then I can work on
probably
it.
not.
So like I
Yeah.
start learning it.
Yeah. So, you know, so yeah, so it's if you can recognize it in the VOD that it's not a skill that's in unconscious incompetence because you were able to recognize that it didn't go well,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
It might be a skill that's in conscious incompetence, right? You know that you're bad at it. You saw yourself being bad at it, and you're like, right?
Yeah.
So in that case, the frustration might be something like, I don't know how to work on this, right?
Mm.
So I don't know how to work on this, I think is a pretty valid frustration, but I think it's also one that doesn't necessarily have to feel bad. Again, because you can kind of rationalize it as like that's normal. That's actually like the base state, right? The
Okay.
base state is not knowing how to work on it. That's where everybody starts. Not knowing how to work on it now doesn't mean that you will never know how to work on it. It just means that you need to try different things and see what works, right? And in fact, you can think about it if you enjoy learning, right? Then you can actually think of that as like, oh cool, like now I have a new thing to work on and I get to enjoy all of that time spent like chewing on this crunchy interesting problem, right?
Mm.
And so you can actually turn that like I don't know how to work on this into, oh good, I don't know how to work on this, like I get to like do something fun now, right? Like, and so if you reframe it that way, it can actually be almost exciting, right? Like you get to look forward to the learning process of it, right?
Yeah.
So that's one thing. If it's a skill that's in conscious competence, right? Stage 3. You've been working on it. You can do it when you focus on it, but this time you weren't focusing on it and you didn't do well, right?
Mm.
You can feel okay about it because inherent to that tells you exactly what you need to do, right?
I need to get better at it, so I
Yeah.
don't have to think about to do it.
Exactly. And I'll well, not exactly actually. I'll push back on that just a tiny bit. It's not that you need to get better at it; it's that you need to get more familiar with it, right?
Okay.
And that's actually a really important distinction, because if you keep trying to get better at it, if you keep trying to study what is correct and just learn more deeply what is correct, that won't
It's
actually
not
help you.
going. Yeah, because like the same thing happens all the again. Like it's something I learn again then, and I
Yeah.
would have to familiarize with that also. So like
Exactly.
I would
You're
think I go
just
forward, but I
making
would.
you're just making your inchworm wider and wider and wider and
Yeah.
wider if you keep trying to figure out what is correct, right? You actually have to figure out, am I correct? You actually have to practice it, not study it.
Mhm.
And repeat. Repeat is the key word when you do it some of the time. You have to repeat it. And then if it was in unconscious confidence, then you wouldn't have made a mistake anyway. So it wouldn't, that's not something we have to worry about, right? So those are the only two. Those are the only two cases. One, you've identified something that you don't know how to work on, and you need to work on it, right? Because you never do it right. In which case, now you have this fun, interesting, exciting thing that you can go like learn more about, and like the learning process is going to be fun, and you can look forward to that. Or it's something that you have worked on and it's inconsistent, in which case you don't have to feel so bad about it, because it's not that you're dumb, it's not that you're stupid, it's not that you're bad, it's that it's not familiar enough yet, and you know how to work on that. You just need to repeat it and find a way to make it more familiar. So I'll go ahead and put those down here with the logic injections too, because that's another really important one. If I lost and it was because I made the wrong move, either it is a skill in stage 2, in which case I can look forward to the learning process and a tough problem that will be rewarding to overcome. Or it is a skill in stage 3, in which case I can remind myself that that's just part of the process of learning, and all it means is that I need to do more practice and less study. Get the reps in. Right?
Mhm.
Does that feel like that makes a dent on how losing feels?
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any reasons left that you can explain that losing feels bad?
Personally, no.
Okay. Well, I'd say that's better than where we started. You know.
Yeah.
So
That's not something I'm gonna argue about.
yeah,
That's true.
right. Yeah. So what we've done here today is this is essentially like the mental hand history process, right? You go through, you ask why like a ton of times, and you just go like super duper 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 deep, right? And knowing which part of the previous statement to ask why about is difficult, right? Like that's part of why I think we ought to do this like together primarily to begin with, until you start kind
Okay.
of figuring out like which piece I tug on, right? Because it can be really easy to get like stuck in thought loops here if you're trying to do it for yourself, right? A lot of this kind of requires like a little bit more out of the box thinking, and it might require like knowledge of the learning process, or like seeing a connection that you like can't do yet, right? In itself, constructing logic injections and doing mental hand histories is, guess what, it's a skill, right? And so you need to actually move that through all 4 stages of the adult learning model, right? You need to, now that you're aware that it exists, you still need to learn how to do it, and so doing it together is going to help you kind of see like what the process is, right? But as we do this more and more together, eventually the goal is that you get to a point where you can actually do it on your own, right? You just sit down with a piece of paper, you kind of, break all this stuff down yourself, you ask why a whole bunch of times, you kind of chain yourself through, and then eventually you're familiar enough with the material of it, and you're good enough at the self-reflection that you can answer the whys enough times to get you kind of where you need to be and to find yourself some resolution. Because the nice thing about this, right, is, like logic injection helps, right? Like that's what makes you feel like better in the game, right? But this, what we're doing here, is really kind of the meatiest work that we'll be doing in the mental game space. Because once you get to a point where you've internalized like these new ways of like thinking about the game, they will actually cause you to no longer feel the emotions that you used to feel when presented with these situations, right? It gets you to a point of what we call resolution with the problem, right? And once you feel resolved, you no longer have to like fight your tilt, because the tilt doesn't arise in the first place. There's just no emotion behind it at all, right? And so the ideal that we will reach for and probably never get to, but we'll keep edging closer to it, is that all of your negative emotions around the game are like addressed, right? To the point where they may still feel kind of frustrating, but at the very least we want to get them to the point where they're not frustrating enough that they take over your head, right? Maybe mildly annoying, but you're able to easily dismiss them and keep playing at a high level, right? That's what we're kind of aiming for. So, is there anything else that you feel like is really important, really pressing to cover today?
No, that's was tilting was the main point I wanted to talk about.
Okay. And you feel like, armed with like this stuff that we've talked about today, you feel like there's a good chance that you'll feel a little bit better in those situations now?
Yeah, I do.
Great. Okay. So I will go ahead and send you these. Boom. And I encourage you to like... Do you have a printer in your house?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, I encourage you to actually like take that image, print it out, and like sit it like right next to your monitor. Okay?
Okay.
And then build the habit of like, when you feel crappy, look over and like read those things. Okay?
Okay.
And if they help, awesome. If they don't help, then I want you to write down what it is that's frustrating you. Okay?
Okay.
And keep like a running list of the things that are still frustrating, and then the next time that we meet, we can like work through those together. Okay?
Okay.
Sweet. And I do have, I have this all in OneNote, so if you if you want like a copy of like everything, I can send that to you as well. And of course the stream VOD is up as well, so if you forget like what exactly we meant by one of these things, then you can go back and watch the VOD as well, and hopefully that'll remind you. Okay, well, good luck, man, and
thanks.
This has been fun, and yeah, cool stuff. I guess I will see you around, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, good luck, man. Not tilting is hard. You can get there. It's a skill.
Yeah.
Be gentle. Okay. See you next time, man. Peace.
Bye.